Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing you hadn't stopped growing. You keep stretching taller and taller day after day until the buildings outside your window look like stepping stones and the cars resemble Matchbox toys. Obviously, that's a fantasy, but the desire to get bigger is something we all understand. It's that universal childhood ritual of standing with your back rigid against a doorframe, waiting for someone to draw a fresh pencil mark just a tiny fraction of an inch above the last one. Poet Tony Mitten took that ordinary biological reality and stretched it to its absolute limits. In his poem titled Growing, he asks us to imagine what happens when that pencil mark keeps moving up forever. Mitten's poem uses this impossible physical journey to map internal shifts that happen as we age, linking our outward size to the perspective we carry through the world. Mitten starts this journey where almost every child's life is centered, right inside the walls of their own home. The first signs of this extreme growth are entirely practical and a bit ridiculous. Your favorite hat rests on top of your head like a thimble. You stretch out one night and suddenly your feet dangle off the mattress. Eventually, you stoop down to squeeze through your own door. But the inconvenience of a shrinking room quickly gives way to power. Obstacles that used to dictate your life disappear. For the first time, you can reach out and grab whatever is sitting on the very highest shelf. Starting the journey within the familiar walls of a house ensures the fantasy feels earned. Every child begins by conquering their immediate environment, proving that the first steps toward the clouds are actually taken across the living room carpet. Once the narrator bursts out of the house, the scale of the progression accelerates rapidly into the vastness of the natural world. To make this transition work, Mitten leans heavily on a literary device called hyperbole. Hyperbole is the use of extreme exaggeration to emphasize a feeling or make a point. It takes a truth and inflates it so much that it becomes impossible to ignore. The text gives us a perfect example of this. Mitten writes that as this child grows, the absolute tallest trees in the countryside will merely scratch your ankles and tickle your knees. You are now striding through a forest as if it were a patch of tall grass. The imagery gets even more specific. The child's head reaches up into the clouds, and eagles decide to build nests in their craggy hair. That single word, craggy, is brilliant. It takes a human being and describes them with the vocabulary of geology, turning the reader into a living, breathing mountain peak. Mitten uses this rapid, vertical acceleration to create a deeply specific emotion. He wants the reader to genuinely feel a monumental, invincible sense of power. And then we reach the absolute maximum limit of this physical progression. The child continues stretching upward until their head completely breaches the Earth's atmosphere and floats in the silent void of outer space. At this altitude, the poem notes a dark logistical reality. Those eagles are going to have to abandon their nests in your hair. The environment up there is entirely devoid of air, forcing the birds to find a safer place to live. You are now looking down at the entire globe. You have achieved a godlike vantage point, completely detached from the surface where you started your life. This absolute isolation at the edge of the universe creates a total detachment from the world below, leaving the reader suspended in a silence that demands a return to reality. At this point of total isolation, the playful, bouncing rhythm of the opening stanzas disappears. The narrator stops imagining what's possible and begins explaining what's necessary. The text identifies a specific trap. When you get bigger, older, and vastly more capable than you used to be, there is a natural tendency to let your ego expand to match your abilities. Mitten counters this by pleading with the reader not to be too proud. The act of returning to your old hometown isn't described as a casual stroll. It requires physically bending down. It is an active, deliberate display of humility. He hopes it won't drive you mad to visit your tiny mom and dad. They haven't literally shrunk. They only appear small because of how massively you have succeeded and grown in comparison. Mitten concludes that the most significant growth isn't measured in inches, but in the humility required to stay connected to your origins. It's a reminder that you can reach the highest shelves and still keep your feet on the ground. Growing ultimately traces two separate paths. There is the inevitable, outward physical journey of getting taller, and the entirely invisible internal journey of building a resilient character. Reaching the highest shelves of success is a wonderful goal. The poem doesn't condemn ambition or capability, as long as the emotional foundation supporting all that weight remains completely intact. So, as you inevitably continue to add more pencil marks to your own doorframe, the question remains: when you finally reach your full height, how will you actively choose to stay grounded to the people who helped you measure your progress?